2. The Red-Haired League. One day last autumn, I visited my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and found him deeply engaged in conversation with a rather stout, flushed-faced elderly gentleman with fiery red hair. I was about to leave, apologizing for my intrusion, when Holmes suddenly pulled me into the room and closed the door behind me. "You could not have come at a better time, my dear Watson," he said cordially. "I feared you were engaged." "I certainly am. Very much so." "Then I may wait in the next room." "Absolutely not. This gentleman, Mr. Wilson, has been my partner and assistant in many of my most successful cases, and I have no doubt that he will be extremely useful to me in yours." The stocky gentleman half rose from his chair and nodded his head in greeting, casting a questioning look from his small, plump eyes. Holmes, as was his habit when in judge mode, leaned back in his armchair, clasping his fingertips together, and said, "Try the sofa. I know, dear Watson, that you share my love for all things, strange and outside the mundane routines of everyday life. You have shown this in your enthusiasm, which has led me to record many of my little adventures and, forgive me, to embellish them a little. Your cases have indeed aroused great interest in me," I remarked. "You will recall that the other day, just before moving on to the extremely simple problem posed by Miss Mary Sutherland, I stated that for strange effects and extraordinary combinations we must appeal to life itself, because life is always far bolder than any effort of imagination, a proposition in which I allow myself the freedom to doubt. Doctor, you are right, but you must agree with my point of view. Otherwise, I will continue to pile facts on you until your mind breaks and you admit I am right." Now, Mr. Jabez Wilson was kind enough to visit me this morning and began a story that is likely to be one of the strangest narratives I have heard in a while. You may have heard me say that the strangest and most unique things are often connected, not with major crimes but with minor ones, and sometimes even with doubt as to whether any crime has been committed at all. From what I have heard, I cannot say whether the present case is an example of a crime, but the course of events is certainly one of the strangest I have ever heard. Perhaps, Mr. Wilson, you would be kind enough to resume your narrative. I request this not only because my friend Dr. Watson has not heard the introduction, but also because, given the peculiar nature of the story, I wish to hear every detail from you. Usually, when I hear even the slightest hint of the course of events, I can guide myself by drawing on the thousands of similar cases that come to mind. In this case, however, I must admit that the facts are, in my opinion, unique. The stout customer puffed out his chest somewhat proudly and pulled a dirty, crumpled newspaper from the inside pocket of his coat. He bowed his head, spreading the newspaper on his lap, and glanced at the advertising column, while I, like my friend, tried to understand what clues he could glean from the man's clothing or appearance. But I learned little from my examination. Our visitor was fat, haughty and slow, bearing all the hallmarks of an ordinary English merchant. He wore baggy grey shepherd's trousers, a rather unclean black frock coat open at the front, and a faded waistcoat, adorned with a square-shaped, perforated metal piece, and a heavy brass Albert chain. On the chair beside him lay a worn top hat and a faded, brown coat with a wrinkled velvet collar. Overall, no matter how closely I examined him, there was nothing remarkable about the man, except for his bright red hair and the excessive expression of sadness and discontent on his face. Sherlock Holmes' keen eye noticed my profession, and seeing my questioning gaze, he smiled and nodded his head. Beyond the obvious facts that he once did manual labor, used snuff, was a Freemason, was in China, and has recently done quite a bit of writing, I can deduce nothing else. Mr. Jabez Wilson, his index finger on the paper, his eyes fixed on the man sitting beside me, rose in his chair. "For good luck, Mr. Holmes, how do you know all this?" he asked. "For example, how do you know that I did manual labor?" "That is as true as the Bible, for I started as a ship carpenter." "Your hand, sir." "Your right hand is considerably larger than your left. You have worked with it a lot, and your muscles are more developed." "And what about the tobacco and Freemasonry matter?" "I will not insult your intelligence by telling you how I read it, especially considering that, quite contrary to the strict rules of your order, you wear a breastpin with a bow and compass motif." "Ah, of course, I forgot about that. But what about the writing? What else could it signify that the 5-centimeter section of your right arm is so shiny, and the smooth mark on your left arm near your elbow where you rested on the table? And what about China? The fish tattoo just above your right wrist could only have come from China." I've done a little research on tattoo patterns and even contributed to the literature on the subject. The technique of painting fish scales a delicate pink color is unique to China. And when you see the Chinese money hanging from your watch chain, it all becomes even simpler. Mr. Jabez Wilson burst into laughter. "Wow," he said. "At first I thought you'd done something clever. But now I realize there's nothing to it, I think." "Watson," said Holmes, "I'm making a mistake in my explanation. There's a saying, omni ignorum pro magnifico, ignorance is magnificence. And if I'm so frank, my poor little reputation will be ruined. Mr. Wilson, can't you find the advertisement?" "Yes, now I understand," he replied, pressing his thick red finger toward the center of the column. "Here it is. It all began with this. Please read it yourself, sir." I took the paper from him and read it. "To the Redheads Union, by virtue of the will of the late Hezekiah Hopkins of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, USA, another position has been opened, entitling a member of the union to a salary of $4 a week in return for symbolic services. All redhead men, healthy and of sound mind, and over 21 years of age may apply. Apply in person to Duncan Ross at the union's offices. 7 Pope's Court, Fleet Street, on Monday at 11 o'clock. "What is this?" I exclaimed after reading the extraordinary announcement twice. Holmes chuckled, as he did when he was in a good mood, and shifted in his chair. "A rather unusual place, isn't it?" he said. "Now, Mr. Wilson, tell me about yourself, your family, and the effect this advertisement has had on your fortune. First, note the name and date of the newspaper, Doctor. This is from the Morning Chronicle, dated April 27th, 1890, only 2 months ago. Very good. Now, Mr. Wilson?" "Well, as I told you." "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Jabez Wilson, wiping his forehead, "I have a small pawn shop in Coburg Square near the city. It's not a very large business, and in recent years it has only provided for my living. I used to be able to employ 2 assistants, but now I only employ 1, and I would have a job to pay him. But he is willing to come to learn the trade for half pay." "What is the name of this kind young man?" asked Sherlock Holmes. "His name is Vincent Spaulding, and he's not exactly young. It's hard to guess his age. Mr. Holmes, I wouldn't want a more intelligent assistant than him, and I know very well that he could improve himself and earn twice as much as I could give him. But after all, if he's content, why should I put ideas into his head? Really, you seem very fortunate to have a staff member working for less than the market rate. It's not common among employers these days. I don't think your assistant is as extraordinary as your advertisement states." "Ah, he has his flaws," said Mr. Wilson. "He's not at all interested in photography. Instead of developing his mind, he's constantly taking pictures, then scurrying down to the cellar like a rabbit to get them developed. That's his biggest flaw, but overall he's a good worker. He has no bad habits. I believe she's still with you?" "Yes, sir. She and a 14-year-old girl, who cooks simple meals and keeps the house clean. They're the only ones in the house, because I'm a widower and I never had a family. The 3 of us live very quietly, sir. We have a roof over our heads and we pay our debts, even if we do nothing else. The first thing that bothered us was that advertisement. Exactly 8 weeks ago today, Spaulding came into the office with this piece of paper in his hand and said, 'My God, Mr. Wilson, I wish I were a redhead.' 'Why?' I asked. 'Look,' he said, 'there's another vacant position in the Redheads League. It's worth a considerable fortune for any man who takes it, and as I understand it, there are more vacancies than men. So the trustees don't know what to do with the money. If only I could change the color of my hair. There's a nice cradle ready for me to crawl into.' 'Well, what is it then?' I asked. 'You see, Mr. Holmes, I'm a homebody, and since my affairs came to me, I often didn't even step over the doormat for weeks, so I didn't know much about what was going on outside, and I always welcomed a little news.' 'You've never heard of the Redheads League?' he asked, his eyes wide. 'Never. I'm curious about this because you're qualified to apply for one of the vacancies.' 'So how much are they worth?' I asked. 'Only a few $100s a year, but the work is light and doesn't interfere much with other pursuits.' You can easily imagine that this intrigues me, because things haven't been going very well for the last few years, and a few $100s would be much more useful. 'Tell me everything,' I said. 'Well,' he said, showing me the advertisement, 'you can see for yourself that the union has a vacant position, and here's the address you should apply to for details. As I understand it, the union was founded by Hezekiah Hopkins, a rather eccentric American millionaire. He was a redhead and had a great sympathy for all redhead men. So when he died, he apparently left his enormous fortune to trustees with instructions to use the interest to provide easy beds for men with red hair. I hear the pay is fantastic and there's very little work to be done. But I said, there would be millions of red-haired men applying. Not as many as you think, he replied. As you can see, this is really a matter for Londoners and adult men. This American came from London when he was young and wanted to do a favor for the old city. Besides, I've heard that if your hair is any color other than light red, dark red, or truly bright, blazing, fiery red, there's no point in applying. Now, if you wish to apply, Mr. Wilson, you can come straight in. But it might not be worth going out of your way for a few £100. Now, gentlemen, as you can see for yourselves, it is a fact that my hair is very thick and of a rich color. So if there is to be competition, I thought I had as good a chance as any man I know. Vincent Spaulding seemed to know a lot about this, so I thought he might be useful, and I ordered him to close his shop for the day and come with me immediately. He was very keen to take a holiday, so we closed his shop and set off toward the address given in the advertisement. I never want to see such a sight again. Mr. Holmes, from north, south, east, and west, every man with a reddish tint in his hair had flocked to the city to answer the advertisement. Fleet Street was overflowing with redheads, and Pope's Court resembled a peddler's orange cart. I never imagined that so many people from all over the country would come together for this single advertisement. There were people of every color: straw blonde, lemon blonde, orange, brick red, Irish setter blonde, liver blonde, clay blonde, but as Spaulding said, very few had the true vibrant flame red hue. I would have given up in despair at the sight of so many waiting, but Spaulding wouldn't let that. I can't even imagine how he managed it, but he pushed, pulled, and pushed me through the crowd to the steps leading up to the office. There was a two-way flow on the steps, some going up hopefully, others turning back in disappointment. But we squeezed in as best we could, and soon we found ourselves in the office. Your experience was quite amusing, Holmes said, as his client paused, taking a large snuff to refresh his memory. Please continue with your very interesting account. The office contained nothing but a few wooden chairs and a wooden table. Behind the table sat a small, short man with a head even redder than mine. He spoke a few words to each candidate who came in, and then always managed to find a fault that would disqualify them. After all, obtaining a vacant position didn't seem like such an easy task. But when it was our turn, the short man was far more favorable to me than to the others, and as soon as we entered, he closed the door so he could speak to us privately. My assistant said, "This is Mr. Jabez Wilson, and he is willing to fill a vacancy in the league, and he is extremely suitable for the job," replied the other. "He meets all the requirements. I don't remember ever seeing anyone so good." He stepped back, tilted his head to the side, and stared at my hair until I was thoroughly embarrassed. Then he suddenly lunged forward, shook my hand, and sincerely congratulated me on my success. "It would be unfair to hesitate," he said. "However, I'm sure you'll excuse me for taking such obvious precautions." He then grabbed my hair with both hands and pulled until I screamed in pain. "There's water in your eyes," he said as he released me. "I see everything is as it should be. But we must be careful, for we've been fooled twice with wigs and once with dye. I could tell you stories of shoemakers, candles that would make you disgusted with human nature." He walked toward the window and shouted from inside that the vacant position had been filled. A murmur of disappointment rose from below, and everyone scattered in different directions, until no one with red hair remained except me and the manager. "My name," he said, "is Mr. Duncan Ross, and I am one of the pensioners from the fund left by our esteemed benefactor. Mr. Wilson, are you married? Do you have a family?" I pondered the matter all day, and by evening my spirits were dampened again, for I was completely convinced that the whole affair was a grand hoax or fraud, and I couldn't even imagine what its purpose might have been. It seemed utterly impossible to believe that someone could draw up such a will or pay such a sum for a simple task as copying the Encyclopedia Britannica. Vincent Spaulding did his best to cheer me up, but by bedtime I had given up on the idea. However, in the morning I decided to take a look anyway. So I bought a bottle of ink, a quill pen, and 7 sheets of large paper and set off for Pope's Court. Surprisingly and pleasingly, everything was as good as it could be. The desk had been prepared for me, and Mr. Duncan Ross was there to ensure I got to work. He started me with the letter A and then left me alone. However, he came by from time to time to check that everything was all right. At 2 o'clock he wished me a good day, congratulated me on the amount I had written, and locked the office door behind me. This went on for days, Mr. Holmes. And on Saturday, the manager came and left 4 gold coins for my weekly work. It was the same the following week and the week after that. I was there at 10 o'clock every morning and left at 2 o'clock every afternoon. In time, Mr. Duncan Ross began to come only once in the mornings, and after a while he didn't come at all. Still, of course, I dared not leave the room for a moment, because I was not sure when he would come, and the room was so good and so convenient for me that I did not want to risk losing it. 8 weeks passed like this, and I wrote about the high priests, archery, armor, architecture, and Attica, and I hoped that I would soon be able to move on to the books beginning with the letter B. It cost me quite a bit of paper, and I filled almost a shelf with my writings. Then suddenly it all came to an end. To the end? Yes, sir. And at the latest this morning, I went to work at 10 o'clock as usual. But the door was closed and locked, and a small piece of cardboard was pinned to the center of the panel. Here it is, you can read it yourself. He held a piece of white cardboard about the size of a notepad. On it was written, "The Red-Haired League disbanded, October 9th, 1890. Sherlock Holmes and I carefully examined this short explanation and the regretful expression on his face, until the comical aspect of the event overshadowed all other considerations, and we both burst into laughter. "I don't see anything funny here," shouted our client. His face flushed red to the roots of his burning head. "If all you can do is laugh at me, I can go somewhere else." "No, no," cried Holmes, pushing himself back into the chair he had half risen from. "I would never miss your case. It is extremely unusual and refreshing, but, if you will allow me, there is a somewhat strange aspect to it." "What steps did you take when you found the card on the door?" "I was stunned, sir. I didn't know what to do. Then I called the offices around here, but none seemed to know anything about it. Finally, I went to the landlord, the accountant who lived on the ground floor, and asked him if he could tell me what had happened to the Redheads League. He said he'd never heard of such an organization. Then I asked him who Mr. Duncan Ross was. He said that name was new to him. "Well," I said, "the gentleman at number 4. "What, the redhead?" "Yes." "Ah," he said, "his name was William Morris. He was a lawyer and was using my room temporarily until his new office was ready. He moved out yesterday." "Where can I find him?" "Ah, at his new office." He gave me the address. "Yes, near St. Paul's Cathedral, 17 King Edward Street." I set out, Mr. Holmes, but when I arrived at that address, it was an artificial kneecap factory. "And no one there had ever heard of Mr. William Morris or Mr. Duncan Ross." "And what did you do then?" asked Holmes. "I went to my house in Saxe-Coburg Square and listened to my assistant's advice. But he was of no help to me. He could only tell me that I would receive news by mail if I waited. But that was not enough. Mr. Holmes, I did not want to lose such a place without a fight, so, having heard that you are a good man who can give advice to poor people in need, I came to you immediately." "And you have acted very wisely," said Holmes. "Your case is extremely remarkable, and I will gladly examine it. From what you've told me, it seems there may be more serious problems than appear at first glance." "Serious enough," said Mr. Jabez Wilson. "I've lost £4 a week." Holmes stated, "Personally, I see no complaint from your point of view against this extraordinary union. On the contrary, as I understand it, you've become about £30 richer, not to mention the detailed information you've acquired on everything beginning with the letter A. You haven't lost anything from that." "No, sir. But I want to know who they are and what their purpose was in playing this joke on me. If it was a joke, it was quite an expensive joke for them, as it cost them £32. We will try to clarify these points for you. And first, Mr. Wilson, I have a couple of questions. How long has this assistant of yours, who first brought the advertisement to your attention, been working for you?" "About a month later." "How did he come about?" "In response to an advertisement." "Was he the only applicant?" "No, there were a dozen." "Why did you choose him?" "Because he was resourceful and would be inexpensive, even at half the price." "Yes. What kind of man is Vincent Spaulding?" "He's short, stocky, very quick-moving, and though he's close to 30, he has no facial hair. There's a white acid stain on his forehead." Holmes rose excitedly in his chair. "Just as I suspected," he said. "Did you notice that his ears are pierced for earrings?" "Yes, sir. He told me that a gypsy did it for him when he was a child." Said Holmes, deep in thought. Is he still with you? Yes, sir, I just left. Were your affairs settled in your absence? There's nothing to complain about, sir. There's not much to do in the mornings anyway. That's enough. Mr. Wilson, I'll be happy to give you my opinion on the matter in a day or two. Today is Saturday, and I hope we can reach a conclusion by Monday. Well, Watson, said Holmes after our guest had left, what do you think of all this? I don't care at all, I answered frankly. It's a highly mysterious subject. Generally, said Holmes, the stranger something is, the less mysterious it is. The truly confusing things are ordinary, unremarkable crimes, just as an ordinary face is. The most difficult to recognize, but I must be quick on this. So what are you going to do? I asked. To smoke, he replied. That's quite a difficult task, and please don't talk to me for 50 minutes. He hunched over his chair, pulling his thin knees up to his hawk's nose, and sat with his eyes closed, his black clay pipe sticking out like a strange bird's beak. I concluded he had fallen asleep, and I shook my head when suddenly, with the movement of a man who had made up his mind, he leaped from his chair and placed his pipe on the mantelpiece. Sarasate is giving a concert this afternoon at St. James's Hall, he stated. What do you say, Watson? Could your patience spare you for a few hours? I have nothing to do today. My profession never keeps me very busy. Then put on your hat and come. I'll pass through town first. We can have lunch on the way. I've noticed there's quite a bit of German music on the program, which I prefer to Italian or French music. It's an inner music, and I want to embark on an inner journey. Come on. We took the subway to Aldersgate. A short walk took us to Saxe-Coburg Square, where the strange story we'd heard that morning had taken place. It was a narrow, small, shabby but stylish place, where 4 rows of gloomy 2-story brick houses faced off against a small, fenced area, a grassy lawn, and a few withered laurel bushes, struggling against the smoky and unsettling atmosphere. On one of the houses on the corner, a brown plaque with 3 gilded balls and the words Jabez Wilson, in white letters, marked the place where our red-haired client conducted his business. Sherlock Holmes stood before it, his head tilted to the side, his eyes gleaming between his narrowed eyelids as he surveyed everything. Then he walked slowly up the street, then back to the corner, still carefully observing the houses. Finally, he returned to the moneylenders and, after striking the pavement 2 or 3 times with his cane, went to the door and knocked. A bright-looking, clean-shaven young man answered instantly and invited him in. Thank you, said Holmes. I just wanted to ask how to get to the Strand from here. 3rd on the right, 4th on the left, replied the assistant, closing the door immediately. A clever man, Holmes observed as we walked away. I think he's the 4th most intelligent man in London, and a contender for 3rd in courage. I've known him before. It seems, I said, Mr. Wilson's assistant plays quite an important role in this mystery of the Red-Headed League. I'm sure you asked for directions to see him, not him. Then what? The knees of his trousers. And what did you see? That's what I expected to see. Why were you wandering the streets? My dear doctor, this is not a time for talking but for observation. We are spies in enemy territory. We have some information about Saxe-Coburg Square. Now, let us explore the areas beyond it. The road we found ourselves on as we rounded the corner from the old Saxe-Coburg Square was a stark contrast, like the front and back of a painting. It was one of the main arteries carrying the city's traffic north and west. The road was clogged with the enormous flow of commerce, rushing in and out in double waves, the pavements blackened by the hurried crowds of pedestrians. Looking at the rows of fine shops and magnificent businesses, it was hard to ignore that they were actually adjacent to the pale, stagnant square we had just left. Let me take a look, said Holmes, stopping at the corner and glancing at the row. I want to remember the order of the houses here. Knowing London thoroughly is one of my hobbies. There's Mortimer's, the tobacconist, the little newspaper shop, the Coburg branch of the City and Suburban Bank, the vegetarian restaurant, and McFarlane's car-making workshop. This takes us to the other block. And now, Doctor, we've finished our business. It's time for some enjoyment. A sandwich and a cup of coffee, and then to the land of violins, where everything is sweet, delicate, and harmonious, where there are no red-haired customers to bother us with their riddles. My friend was an enthusiastic musician, not only a very talented performer, but also an extraordinary composer. All afternoon he sat in perfect contentment, gently swaying his long, slender fingers to the rhythm of the music. His slightly smiling face and his languid, dreamy eyes bore no resemblance whatsoever to those of the relentless, clever and quick-witted criminal Holmes. In his unique character, the dual nature alternated, and his excessive precision and wit, as I often thought, represented a reaction against the poetic and thoughtful mood that sometimes prevailed in him. The fluctuation of his nature took him from excessive lethargy to burning energy, and as I knew well, he had never been so truly frightening when he lay in his armchair for days on end, among his improvisations and black-printed manuscripts. Then suddenly a craving for prey would seize him, and his brilliant judgment would rise to the level of intuition, so much so that those unfamiliar with his methods would look upon him with suspicion, as if he were a man whose knowledge surpassed that of other mortals. When I saw him that afternoon in St. James's Hall, absorbed in the music, I sensed that bad times might befall those. He had decided to hunt when we went. Outside he said, "I have no doubt you wish to go home, Doctor." "Yes, that would be right. And I have some business to attend to, which will take me a few hours." "This business in Coburg Square is serious." "Why is it so serious?" "A serious crime is being planned. I have every reason to believe we can get there in time to stop it. But the fact that it's Saturday complicates things a bit. I will need your help tonight." "What time?" 10 years will be early enough. I'll be on Baker Street at 10 o'clock. "Very well. And I say, Doctor, there may be a small danger. So please put your army pistol in your pocket." He waved his hand, turned around and vanished into the crowd in an instant. Hope I'm no more thick-headed than my neighbors. But in my dealings with Sherlock Holmes, I was always grappling with my own stupidity. I had heard what he had heard, seen what he had seen. Yet it was clear from his words that he saw not only what had happened, but what was to come. While to me, the whole affair was still confusing and grotesque. Driving back to my house in Kensington, I thought about everything from the extraordinary story of the red-haired photocopier of the encyclopedia to the visit to Saxe-Coburg Square and the ominous words he had spoken to me as he left. What was the purpose of tonight's trip, and why should I go armed? Where were we going, and what were we going to do? From Holmes I understood that this smooth-faced moneylender was a difficult man, a man capable of playing a deep game. I tried to figure it out, but gave up in despair and set the matter aside until nightfall provided an explanation. It was 9:15 when I left the house and walked through the park along Oxford Street to Baker Street. 2 carriages were standing at the door, and as I entered the hallway, I heard voices from upstairs. Entering his room, I found Holmes engaged in a lively conversation with 2 men. One I recognized as Peter Jones, the official police agent. The other a tall, thin man with a sad face, wearing a very bright hat and an oppressively respectable frock coat. "Ah, our team is complete," said Holmes, buttoning his coat and taking his heavy hunting whip from the shelf. "Watson, I suppose you know Mr. Jones from Scotland Yard. Let me introduce you to Mr. Merriweather, who will accompany us on our adventure tonight. We're hunting in pairs again. Doctor, you see," said Jones in his characteristically effective manner, "our friend here is a great guy to start the hunt. All he wants is an old dog to help him chase." "I hope a wild goose isn't the end of our chase," Mr. Merriweather remarked pessimistically. "You can trust Mr. Holmes quite well." "Sir," said the police officer conceitedly, "he has his own methods, which, if I may say so, are a bit too theoretical and fantastical. But he has the qualities of a detective. It would not be an exaggeration to say that on 1 or 2 occasions, as in the Sholto murder and the Agra treasure case, he has come closer to the truth than the official authorities." "If you say so, Mr. Jones, no problem," said the stranger respectfully. "I must confess, however, that I miss my condom. For the first time in 27 years, I'm spending a Saturday night without one." "I suppose you will be playing with a higher stake than you have ever played before. And the game will be more exciting," said Sherlock Holmes. "For you, Mr. Merriweather, the stake will be around £30,000. And for you, Jones, he will be the man you wish to get your hands on. John Clay, murderer, thief, slayer, and swindler. Mr. Merriweather is a young man, but at the height of his profession, and I would rather wear my bracelets on him than on any criminal in London. Young John Clay is an extraordinary man. His grandfather was a royal duke, and he himself was educated at Eton and Oxford. His intellect is as cunning as his fingers, and although we find his trail at every turn, we never know where we will find him. One week, he is committing a robbery in Scotland. The next, he is raising money to build an orphanage in Cornwall. I have been tracking him for years and have yet to see him. I hope I will have the honor of introducing you this evening. I have worked with Mr. John Clay a couple of times, and I agree with you that he is at the height of his profession. However, it is past 10 o'clock, and it is time for us to leave. If you two take the first carriage, Watson and I will follow in the second. During the long journey, Sherlock Holmes was not very talkative, leaning back in the taxi and humming the melodies he had heard that afternoon. We made our way through the endless labyrinth of gas lamp-lit streets to Farrington Street. "We're almost there now," my friend remarked. "This man, Merriweather, is a bank manager and is personally involved. I thought it would be good for Jones to be with us. He's a complete idiot in his profession, but not a bad man. He has one good quality. When he catches someone, he's as brave as a bulldog and as stubborn as a lobster. Here we are, and they're waiting for us." We had reached the same crowded street where we had found ourselves that morning. Our taxis were sent, and following Mr. Merriweather's directions, we passed through a narrow passageway and entered through a side door he opened for us. Inside, there was a small corridor ending in a very large iron door. This door also opened, leading down a staircase of winding stone steps, which ended in another imposing door. Mr. Merriweather stopped to light a lantern, then led us down a dark, earthy-smelling passageway through which, after opening a third door, he led us into a huge cellar or pantry filled with chests and large boxes. "You're not so vulnerable from above," Holmes remarked, raising the lantern and looking around. "Not from below either," said Mr. Merriweather, tapping his cane on the flags laid out on the ground. "Good heavens, it makes a completely empty sound," he exclaimed, looking up in astonishment. "I really should ask you to be a little quieter," said Holmes sternly. "You've already jeopardized the success of our entire expedition. May I please ask you to sit on one of those boxes and not disturb it?" With a serious expression, Mr. Merriweather perched on a chest, a look of considerable hurt on his face. Holmes knelt down and began to carefully examine the cracks between the stones with his lantern and magnifying glass. A few seconds were enough to satisfy him, for he immediately jumped to his feet and put his binoculars in his pocket. "We have at least an hour ahead of us," he stated, "because they can barely move a step until the good moneylender is safely in bed. Then they won't waste a minute, because the faster they finish their business, the more time they'll have to escape. Right now, Doctor, as you can imagine, we're in the basement of the City, branch of one of London's leading banks. Mr. Merriweather is the chairman of the board, and he will explain to you why London's more audacious criminals are currently showing such great interest in this basement." The director whispered, "This is our French gold. We've received several warnings that there might be an assassination attempt on it." "Your French gold?" "Yes, a few months ago we borrowed 30,000 Napoleons from the Bank of France to strengthen our funds. It turns out we never opened the money, and it's still in our vault. In the chest I'm sitting on, there are 2,000 Napoleons, wrapped in layers of lead foil, our current reserve of gold. Bullion is far greater than what is usually held in a single branch, and the managers are worried about it." "They were quite right," Holmes remarked. "Now is the time to put our little plans in order. I expect things to reach their climax in an hour. In the meantime, Mr. Merriweather, we must draw a curtain over that dark lantern." "And we'll sit in the dark?" "I'm afraid so. I brought a deck of playing cards in my pocket, and since we're a group, I thought you might still want to keep your tires with you. But I see the enemy's preparations are so advanced that we can't risk the presence of a light. And above all, we must choose our positions. These are brave men, and even if we catch them at a disadvantage, they can harm us if we're not careful. I'll stand behind that chest, and you two hide behind them. Then, when I shine the light on them, approach quickly. If they fire, Watson, don't hesitate to shoot them." I placed my pistol, cocked, on the wooden case behind which I was crouching. Holmes lit the bolt of his lantern, plunging us into pitch darkness. An absolute darkness unlike any I had ever experienced before. The smell of warm metal reminded us that the light was still there, ready to flicker at any moment. With nerves strained by anticipation, there was something unsettling and overwhelming in this sudden darkness and the cold, damp air of the cellar. "There's only one way out," Holmes whispered. "That is to go through the house and out onto Saxe-Coburg Square. I hope you've done what I asked, Jones. An inspector and 2 officers are waiting at the front door, so we've closed all the loopholes. Now we must remain silent and wait." How long it had been. When I later compared the notes, only an hour and 15 minutes had passed, but it felt to me as if the night were almost over and dawn was breaking. My limbs were tired and stiff, for I was afraid to change my position. Yet my nerves were on edge and my hearing so sharpened that I could not only hear the faint breaths of my friends, but distinguish the deeper, heavier breaths of the burly Jones from the thin sigh of the bank manager. From where I stood, I could look down over the vault onto the floor. Suddenly my eyes caught a flash of light. At first, it was just a dazzling spark on the stone pavement. Then it stretched out, becoming a yellow line, and then, without any warning or sound, it seemed to have opened up and a white, almost feminine hand appeared. This hand probed the center of the small area of light. For about a minute, with its curled fingers, the hand emerged from the ground. Then, as suddenly as it seemed, it retracted and everything was plunged back into darkness, except for a single dazzling spark marking a crack between the stones. But its disappearance was only momentary. One of the large, white stones tipped over with a cracking sound, leaving a large, square hole through which the light of a lantern streamed. From the edge, a boyish face with neat features appeared. Looking around carefully and then, gripping the sides of the hole with one hand each, he rose to shoulder and waist height until one knee rested on the edge. A moment later he stopped at the edge of the hole and began dragging behind him a companion, as agile and small as himself. Pale-faced and red-haired. "Everything is all right," he whispered. "Did you get the chisel and the bags?"
"Oh my God! Jump, Archie, jump! I'll get it too!"
Sherlock Holmes leaped and grabbed the uninvited guest by the collar. The other plunged into the hole, and as he grasped Jones's skirts, I heard the sound of the fabric tearing. A light flashed on the barrel of a gun, but Holmes's hunting whip struck the man's wrist, and the gun clanged to the stone floor. "It's no use, John Clay," Holmes said indifferently. "You have no chance." "I understand," replied the other with utmost composure. "I think my friend is doing well, but I see you're going after him." "There are 3 men waiting for him at the door," said Holmes. "Ah, indeed. You seem to have done the job very well. I must congratulate you." "Me too," replied Holmes. "Your idea, Redhead, was very new and effective." "You'll see your friend again soon," said Jones. "He's faster than I am at going down the pits. Just be patient while I repair the derbies." "Please don't touch me with your dirty hands," cried the prisoner as the handcuffs were fastened to his wrists. "Perhaps you don't realize that royal blood flows in my veins. And please always address me with sir and please." "Very well," said Jones, staring intently and with a mocking smile. "Well, please, sir, would you go upstairs? We can call a taxi to take you to the police station from there." "That's better," said John Clay calmly. He gave a big salute to all 3 of us and quietly walked away under the detective's watchful eye. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes," said Mr. Merriweather, following them from the cellar, "I don't know how the bank will thank you or repay you. There's no doubt that you have most thoroughly detected and thwarted one of the most determined bank robbery attempts I have ever encountered in my experience." Holmes said, "I had a couple of small accounts to settle with Mr. John Clay. I incurred a small expense because of this matter, which I hope the bank will reimburse, but beyond that, I was more than rewarded for having had a unique experience in many ways, and for hearing the extremely remarkable story of the League of Redheads. Look, Watson," he explained, "sitting on Baker Street early in the morning with a glass of whiskey and soda, it was obvious from the start that the only possible purpose of this rather fantastic business of advertising the League and copying the encyclopedia was to keep this not-so-clever moneylender out of trouble for a few hours each day. It was a bizarre way of achieving it, but it would be hard to suggest a better one. This method was undoubtedly given to Clay's clever mind by inspiration from the color of his accomplice's hair. 4s a week should have enticed him. And what difference did it make to those who gamble for thousands of pounds? They placed the ad, one con man took over the temporary office, the other encouraged the man to apply, and together they managed to ensure his absence every morning of the week. Since I heard the assistant came for half pay, it was clear to me he had a strong reason to secure this job. So how could you have guessed what the purpose was? If there had been women at home, I would have suspected it was a commonplace intrigue, but that wasn't the case at all. The man's business was small, and there was nothing in his house that could explain such elaborate preparations and such expense. So, something had to happen outside the house. What could it be? I considered the assistant's fondness for photography and his trick of going down to the basement. The basement! That's the end of this complicated clue. Then I started an investigation into this mysterious assistant and learned I was dealing with one of London's most cold-blooded and audacious criminals. He was doing something in the basement, something that lasted for hours a day for months. Once again, what could it be? Nothing came to mind except that he was digging a tunnel to another building. I had already gotten to this point when we arrived at the scene. I startled you by tapping my stick on the pavement. I was trying to figure out whether the basement was in the front or the back. It wasn't in the front. Then I rang the bell, and as I hoped, the assistant answered. We had had a few clashes, but we had never seen each other before. I barely looked at his face. What I wanted to see were his knees. You must have noticed how worn, wrinkled, and stained they were. They were talking about the hours they had been digging. The only remaining point was what they were digging for. I turned the corner, saw the City and Suburban Bank, which was adjacent to our friend's property, and felt I had solved my problem. On my way home after the concert, I called Scotland Yard and the head of the bank and got the result you see. So how did you know they were going to attempt it tonight? I asked. Well, when they closed the league offices, it was a sign that they no longer cared about Mr. Jabez Wilson's presence. That is, that they had completed their tunnel. But it was essential that they use the tunnel soon, because it could be discovered or the gold bars could be stolen. Saturday would be more convenient than other days, as it would give them 2 days to escape. For all these reasons, I expected them to come tonight. You explained that wonderfully, I exclaimed with heartfelt admiration. The chain is very long, but each link reflects the truth. It saved me from boredom, he replied, yawning. Alas, I already feel boredom enveloping me. My life is spent in a long struggle to escape the mundaneities of existence. These little problems help me do that. And you are a benefactor of this race, I said. He shrugged. Perhaps it doesn't really matter in the end, he noted. As Gustave Flaubert wrote to George Sand, man is nothing, work is everything.